It looks like we've got everybody starting to join now. We're going to give it another minute while people come in, but welcome to day 6 of the Climate Service Providers Academy. While we're waiting for those people, several of you already know me. I'm emceeing today. My name is Jim Fox. I'm with Fernleaf, a company out of Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville is the ancestral home of the Cherokee and Catawba, and I'm a senior resilience advisor. So with that in mind, I am going to welcome you with the agenda. So we're talking with the Mid-North Atlantic region today, and you'll be seeing presentations discussing MRISA, CC Run, and a lot of their partners here as well too. And so you should have a copy of this agenda. We are also going to be actively chatting links to you as they come up. Please don't hesitate to also enter your questions and answers in the chat. And if there's nothing else to start with here, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. So our two speakers today are Daniel Bader and Lena Easton Calabria. Lena is a policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and program manager for the NOAA-funded Mid-Atlantic Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is obviously a formal RISA, now CAP-RISA program, and that acronym is MRISA. She has a background in anthropology, climate change, and environmental justice, and is passionate about using research to solve real-world problems. To show that passion, she previously conducted research on globalization and climate change in indigenous communities. She's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford's Environmental Change Institute and holds a Master of Science in Environmental Change and Management, also from the University of Oxford, and a bachelor's degree in Medical Anthropology and Global Health from the University of Washington. Our other speaker is Daniel Bader. He's a senior staff associate at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, part of Columbia University's Climate School. His primary responsibility is managing the consortium for climate risk in the urban Northeast. That's what CC Run stands for, a NOAA CAP-RISA project. He has extensive experience with preparing and communicating climate science risk information to policymakers, specifically in states and cities across the Northeast. The data he has worked with is the foundation for climate resiliency planning efforts in New York City, New York State, and NASA. His educational background includes a Bachelor of Science in Atmospheric Science from Cornell University and a Master's in Climate and Society from Columbia University. Welcome to both of you. And with that, I just do want to remind people to don't hesitate to send questions in the chat. We won't interrupt the speakers unless there's something urgent about that. We want to be capturing those questions so that when we do go to questions and answers, we can rapidly kind of go through that list. With that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Please go right ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'll kick us off today. My name is Lena Easton Calabria, and again, thank you to ASAP for having us. We're really excited to be here today and excited to learn with you all and get to share a little bit about MRISA on our side and then CC Run as well. Dan, do you have anything you want to add?
Just thanks everybody for joining us, and we're looking forward to share more about not only our two individual CAP-RISA programs, but the work that the broader CAP-RISA network, which is now made up of 13 teams that, if you've been participating in the prior sections, have heard a bit about some of those groups as well, is working on.
Great. So we'll go to the next slide. Great. So some of these teams might already be familiar to you at this point, and we don't need to dive deeply into the entire CAP-RISA partnership, but we are a national team, a national program of which there are regional teams. So you can see in this map here, so the Mid-Atlantic RISA is, CAP-RISA program is in purple, and then CC-RUN is there in yellow. And the CAP-RISA program really brings together diverse disciplines and sectors and researchers ranging from, stormwater modelers to social scientists to equity experts. It's a very interdisciplinary program, and all of our teams reflect that and really focused on building resilience to climate adaptation and community resilience to climate change. And then, great. Okay, we'll start with MRISA. I wanted to give an opportunity for you all to see our region in depth because we cover, we're very much focused on the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So that's why we have a little bit of New York, not quite all of Pennsylvania, but you can see our region here. So MRISA was established in 2016. We are currently in our second 5-year grant from NOAA. And we are a partnership of 7 institutions housed at the RAND Corporation. And you can see the institutions. We have researchers at Cornell, Johns Hopkins, Virginia Institute of Marine Science, Morgan State University, and others here on the slide. We aim to have institutions that represent different areas of this region, and we're continually aiming to kind of improve that, but we've added, for example, Morgan State in our last kind of 5-year grant application. We keep bringing people on as is useful and also just to help with our own research. And our mission is really to collaborate with communities in the Mid-Atlantic. We have, I will say, one of the strengths of MRISA is our tool building and data science capabilities. And we really aim to work with communities in the Mid-Atlantic to help communities actually utilize data tools and understand data. And again, I think that is a strength of ours that we try to build out through tools, and especially collaborative tools and co-produced tools, which I'll be talking about a little bit later today. And kind of that comes along with that is public engagement. Maybe go to the next slide, Jim, please. So for MRISA 2.0, which is our nice term for our second 5-year grant, we really decided to, with our feet kind of under us a little bit more, to not only continue to work across the entire region, but also really hone in on 3 specific communities of focus. So those are Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and coastal Virginia, like you can see here on the map. In Pittsburgh, we have both data scientists and stormwater modelers, as well as social scientists working on issues of flooding, extreme precipitation, and equity. In Baltimore, there's more of a focus on green infrastructure. We still include equity, and that's given some of these locations, such as Baltimore, it's always really important to include focuses of environmental justice and equity. So actually all 3 of these locations have equity and environmental justice as kind of a core component, in addition to stormwater focus for Pittsburgh, green infrastructure, heat, and other issues for Baltimore. And then in coastal Virginia, it's really focused on flooding and coastal flooding, so sea level rise impacts in rural Virginia. Our PI, Dr. Molly Mitchell, that's working there, is working not only with tribal communities, but also rural communities in that area on those issues. And these focus areas and kind of our work over the last couple of years within MRISA 2.0 led us into the CAP-RISA Small Grants Program. If you could go to the next slide when you get a second, Jim, that'd be great. You may have heard about the Small Grants Program from other folks who have presented. So this is a program that we have the opportunity to apply for a small-ish pot of funding to actually hold kind of a competition for community organizations or others in our region that meet, to meet specific objectives that we have as a team or to support research. The guidelines are flexible enough that I think each CAPRISA has been able to adapt this program to its own region and kind of the needs of the region, and how the CAPRISA can interact with these awardees. So I'll speak to the MRISA CAPRISA program, and I think Dan will be touching on the CC Run program later as well. So you can see our competitions somewhat mirror our communities of focus. So we had a competition focused on Pittsburgh, Baltimore. Instead of coastal Virginia, we focused on rural Virginia as a whole. We're aiming to really expand our partnerships and focus across the entirety of Virginia. And then we also had a regional competition that was focused on climate and hazard mitigation planning. And that was actually advertised as an opportunity to use our climate and hazard mitigation planning tool, which I'll be talking about later. And really, we wanted to provide funding for folks to actually use that tool in building a plan and provide feedback, let us know what should be different or what could be more helpful, that type of thing. So we, unlike some CAPRISA programs, we're very early on in this process. This is our first time ever running a small grants competition. And we've been planning for over a year, but we've just actually started to execute it. So we had a call for proposals in late August. We had people apply in September, and we just made the funding decisions at the end of October. Unfortunately, they're not public yet, so I can't share who received them, but I will share we're very excited about opportunities to work with new organizations. And as you can see here, one of the objectives of this program for us was really to build partnerships, new partnerships, not just between MRISA and the recipients or others, but also between the recipients and others in their own communities. We actually looked for that and asked for that in the proposals. And then again, so the goal of this is really enhancing climate adaptation and resilience within communities in line with our mission, and also really building people and supporting people to use MRISA products and tools and provide feedback so we can improve them, but also so they become familiar with these tools, and we will be offering our support as well. If people have questions or just generally in their projects need some of our expertise. So we're very excited about this program. We will have more information coming over time, so please check out our website. The awards are for 1 year with the possibility of a no-cost extension. So we're really at the beginning of that year, but it's something that we are incredibly excited about as a team. And I think that might be maybe over to Dan now. I think his slides might be next.
Thanks. I'll just give a brief overview presentation of CC Run, which again stands for the Consortium for Climate Risk in the Urban Northeast. CC Run, our team is actually in our third phase of funding now. The award was first started in 2010. And what makes CC Run unique is that we're the only CAPRISA team that has a principal focus on urban and peri-urban settings. So our geographical region is basically the I-95 corridor running from Philadelphia up through Boston. Not only the three big cities, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, but the smaller and medium-sized cities in the area, as well as the various communities and neighborhoods that make up the region and the surrounding metropolitan areas. Our work is really focused on 5 critical challenges for climate adaptation. First and foremost, actionable climate risk information, a focus on evaluation of adaptation as well. Equity and justice is a very, very important theme that's grown in terms of its visibility in the network over time. We're focused on coordinating across scales. For us, it's really coordinating, let's say, between the city and the state levels of government, and also integrating mitigation where possible with adaptation. While this program is really focused on adaptation, where there are opportunities, we always consider mitigation as well. Our team is broken up into topical work areas with various expertise. We're a partnership of 6 institutions, Drexel in Philadelphia, Stevens Institute in Rutgers in New Jersey, City University of New York, Hunter College in Columbia, where I sit, the lead organization in New York City, and Boston University up in Massachusetts. Our work has shifted over each of the phases. We originally started kind of focusing on the big 3 cities, and now it has shifted to working with the smaller to medium-sized communities, and as well as the neighborhood and frontline communities across the urban Northeast. Being in an urban environment makes our work in some ways different than the other teams across the network. If we go on to the next slide, there's one of the key areas which CAP RISA was designed to fill was the provision of climate services, and really climate services in terms of partnerships between stakeholders and scientists. And what that allows to be generated is co-generated information. It's not just scientists giving stakeholders projections or forecast information, and it's not just stakeholders asking our team for the latest science. It's working together to derive scientific information that incorporates and is tailored to the individual needs of who we're working with. So some of our more traditional climate services, broadly defined, let's say, are just climate impact assessment and application. We've worked with New York State and New York City on both their adaptation plans. The projections of record in the city and the state are both generated from our team. Recently, we worked with the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding area down in Pennsylvania on the Philadelphia Climate Resilience Research Agenda, which outlines steps that those areas can take when thinking about adaptation. And we'll hear from our case study speaker today. We worked with an example, kind of working with the private sector, the Con Ed, the energy utility here in New York City, on their climate change vulnerability study. We also have educational and other outreach efforts that we do. I'd like to highlight our seminar series, which has been going on since early in phase 2. We have a monthly seminar that's focused on cities, climate, and green infrastructure. It's now fully remote, and all the past seminars are available on our website, and you can join the listserv to receive emails monthly when these events are, who the speakers are going to be. It's a really great way for us to interact with stakeholders and participants in our service area. And we've also developed a number of data decision support tools, whether it be something like AdaptMap, which is not pictured here, but it's a coastal flood hazard tool where you can put sea level rise information in addition to, let's say, where physical infrastructure or critical infrastructure is located, and understand what the risks may be as they change with time. We've also partnered with the Northeast Regional Climate Center at Cornell University on a climate gauge, a summer gauges tool where you can come and access for given weather stations across the Northeast United States to see how temperature, precipitation, and other climate extremes have been running over the course of a season, over the course of a given year. So these are just some few examples of kind of the more traditional climate services we provide. As we move into the next slide here, our work has really evolved in many ways to working and engaging with frontline communities. Partnering in some cases on the neighborhood, this block by block level of research that we've been moving towards. I'd like to highlight a few of these efforts. In Massachusetts, in Chelsea, in the East Boston neighborhoods, we have a CHEAT project led by our public health team at Boston University. This brings together researchers, members of the community, and city staff to work and think about extreme heat risk. One of the tools that was developed out of this work is a heat vulnerability index, where you can see how the heat may change and overlay that with some socioeconomic data. We, in recent years in Philadelphia, looking at urban heat island mitigation, created this sprinkler and bench planter, also these shaded structures that get installed on city streets. They allow for some cooling. It's a place of refuge on a really hot day when you're outside. This was really sparked by during COVID, the peak of the COVID, when people were outside as a way to cool off or to get some fresh air and maintain distance. You set these structures up to maintain comfort while they're outside. That was piloted in one neighborhood in Philadelphia, and it now has been expanded to over 4 communities, especially in the southwestern part of the city. We run a climate forum series with New York Sea Grant, another NOAA partner. Originally, that series was concentrated on flood risk and flood vulnerability in the southern portions of New York City, coastal Queens, coastal Brooklyn, Staten Island, Lower Manhattan. We recently restarted that series and now focusing on communities in the northern part of Queens. This area was particularly hit hard during the flooding event in September 2021 when the remnants of Hurricane Ida crossed over into this region, and there were several fatalities, and it really exposed some risks that weren't necessarily thought of previously for these storm events. And we are one of the teams that also has received this additional funding for a small grants competition. Our Community Climate Resilience CCR grant competition was one of the first teams to get started. And if we look at the next slide, we'll quickly run through our efforts in that area. We have partnered with a set of we have funded 4 different organizations. We had over 30 applicants and had to narrow them down, which was quite a difficult process, but we've selected these 4 groups to work with. Each of the groups is paired with one of the members on our research team. So we have a dedicated person as a point working with the organizations. Up in Boston, we're working with a community group known as Green Roots. In the Hudson Valley and in Elizabeth, New Jersey, we're working with Groundworks. And in Philadelphia, we're looking at the Eastwick neighborhood. Eastwick United is our community partner there. I think we have one more slide here, which kind of goes a little bit more into the specifics of the program. Each of these teams has received a $25,000 award. We required the organizations that were applying and therefore participating to be categorized with a special designation. As I mentioned, partnering with each of our PIs that's going to support the research, and it's co-developed. There's deliverables that will come out of this work. It's a partnership between our team members, our physical science and social science expertise, and the grantees. What this enables is the information and materials derived through this program to be targeted to these individual communities. You know, this is really micro scale work that's taking place. And it's a program that's been guided by multi-dimensional equity framework and collaboration with other grant managers. One of the things about the CAP-RISA network is we're very much connected to the other teams. We actually all just got back, or some of us got back from Seattle last week, where we had the CAP-RISA network meeting. So it was an opportunity for us to engage, and myself and Lena, the other program managers, are talking monthly, and a lot of the other programs are we're all working together to make these small grants awards and small grants funding to be the most successful, as it's the first time it's really been piloted in the CAP-RISA network. The Great Lakes team was really the first team to get started with this type of work some years ago. So I think that covers the overview that we had planned for both our team and the Mid-Atlantic team. I think that if I'm recalling the agenda correctly, we have a moment or two here for some questions, unless, Lena, do you want to give the overview of the tools here quickly?
Yeah, let's stop for Q&A. I'll do this one after the break when we go into our partner presentation.
Okay. So we'd be happy to answer any questions now of kind of an overview, and I think you can drop them in the chat. It might be the easiest and the preferred way. We'll try and address them as they come in. Any questions about just not only our individual teams, but also the CAP-RISA program that you may have, we'll try and address those as well.
Yeah, it looks like the first question there is from Pallavi. Can you guys see that? Do you want to just kind of read those and then answer those yourself?
Yes, I can drop a link for the CC Run seminars in the chat. Let me grab that. I'll grab that during the defined break period. I'll make sure I drop the listserv sign up. Okay,
great. The second question, and it's a couple different questions together, is from Kyra. Do one of you want to start addressing that? I think there's one on Marisa and then the others on CC Run.
Which one? So I'm actually not seeing that question.
So the first question is, how does Marisa work with?
Great. Okay, yeah, I can get started on that. So part of what I would say our first 5-year grant was really so starting in 2016, actually before I joined the team, I joined in 2020, but there's a lot to do when you kind of not enter into a space, right? RAND is located in the headquarters for this team is Washington, D.C. RAND. And these other institutions are also in the Mid-Atlantic. But we made sure to take time and actually seek out conversations with others who are working in the environmental space or the climate space in our region to really get a sense of what the needs are. And that's something actually that we've continued to do over time. So actually, when I had joined the team, we were in the process of submitting our rebid grant to NOAA for the second 5-year grant, Marisa 2.0. And I helped to lead 3 very large listening sessions. I think we had like 50 or 60 people in each one that were community members, environmental leaders, policymakers from the Mid-Atlantic region. We split those up actually intra-regionally. So we had folks from similar areas on each one or closer areas on each one. And that was, again, really wanting to take the time to actually discuss and hear from really actually not discuss. We wanted to hear. We asked questions of where are the gaps, where are the needs, how can Marisa not, avoid duplication of work that's already happening. We were very well positioned to actually kind of have our focus areas for Marisa 2.0 being in coastal Virginia, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore. We had researchers in those areas who really had already identified needs. And then by talking to government officials and community members and others through those listening sessions, we were able to kind of validate those needs and also get a sense of how Marisa could best approach those needs. So, for example, in Pittsburgh, there was both a need and a desire we actually need and have been building out stormwater modeling tools and data. We've also been working with community groups that very much wanted to work with Marisa and had some relationships already with some of the researchers to do more social science focus and equity focus on communities that are experiencing high levels of flooding. So very much frontline communities. We paid attention to the Justice 40 areas as well. So that's, I would say, our overall strategy. We're very careful about not just talking as a team, setting our agenda and going out, because we are so reliant and focused on partnerships. We need to make sure we're not coming in, doing something that somebody else is already doing, disrupting relationships that are already existing or being built in the region. So that's a key component of how we choose our locations. Thanks for that question.
Great. And the second part of that question is, does CC Run see their state and local partners implementing the plans that CC Run has helped put together? And the reason the question is there is any worry that those assessments and plans just sit on the shelf?
We try to keep track of kind of decisions that are being made based on our data and our efforts as best possible. We know that in New York City and New York State, there are either mandated codified piece of legislation that have been codified that require the use of some of our projections. So for example, in New York State, there's a It's the acronym is CRRA. It's a Community Risk and Resilience Act that the State Department of Environmental Conservation has codified the use of our sea level rise projections, and it's similar in the city as well. And we know that there are projects being implemented that are relying on that science, and that science is guiding it. A lot of the post Sandy resiliency work in New York City has been informed by our research, and we know, and we'll hear in a bit also about how utility ComEd is using our science in their vulnerability study and their resiliency plans as well. So we try to get the best sense we can, and that's why evaluation is a component of each of our teams. Is one of the themes across the network is having evaluation expertise on board to understand how the data is being implemented, and also what the decisions that have been made, how have they worked? Have they been successful or not? So.
Great. The next question's for you too, Daniel. This is from Leah. Does your work overlap with the Weatherization Assistance Program resources in Pennsylvania and maybe some other states too? And that's the program that's focused on lower income household owners.
I'm honestly not familiar myself about that specific program, but I'll just say, we have made a significant push to work in lower income communities as best possible to make our data and our work accessible to those in most need. Often those areas have the least adaptive capacity. So while I'm not familiar with this specific program, which I'll certainly check out, it's certainly very much on our mind. And being in an urban setting is kind of unique in some ways because we have such a large vulnerable population, and there's differing definitions of what you would define as a frontline community or what's a vulnerable group and how we define them. But the fact that there are so many of these groups within our service area, and for Marisa to this, it extends down the coast into Baltimore and Washington, D.C., into Richmond as well, if you kind of follow 95 further south. Our work has the potential to impact a tremendous amount of people as well. So, it has that exposure. And also, one of the things we find in our research is that a lot of the communities and neighborhoods we work with, they have tremendous knowledge that the researchers don't know. And it's as simple as knowing in your apartment complex of where the elderly folks live. And why does that matter? It matters if there's an evacuation because of a hurricane coming. The city personnel, Office of Emergency Management, isn't going to know where that elderly folk who needs assistance evacuating is. These communities do. And by partnering with them through a lot of the scientific engagement that CAPRISA does, we can make more informed decision. And that's just a small example there. So I'll stop.
That's great. And Leah, maybe you could just chat a link to that program for everybody that's participating so we can all get some of that detail. Lena, the next question's for you, and it's from Brian. How does Marisa plan to continue evolving its publicly available tools? Brian's consulting firm, 2 Degrees Adapt, has clients that rely on them but have identified outstanding gaps.
Yeah, well, thank you for this question, because this is a kind of a continuing topic for us, because one of the issues is we build a tool and we don't always know who is using it. So I guess first and foremost, Brian, I'm going to put my email in the chat. If any of your clients want to send me a list of those gaps, we would love that, because that's actually something that we talked about as one of the goals for the small grants program. Is we want to, well, the program itself, right? We're working with more community-based organizations, but give folks the opportunity to use our tools, and we know they're using them, and we can talk to them about our tools. So a lot of our tools have been co-developed, like I said, for the climate and hazard mitigation planning tool, which I'll talk about a little more later. We actually worked with and asked feedback from folks who build hazard mitigation plans as we were developing the tool. Now that it's published, we were running the small grants competition focused on CHAMP, so we could actually pay someone to do that. Because we really do want that feedback. It's just really hard to know, even if we are looking at, data analytics and that type of thing, it's really hard to know who exactly is using our tools and how extensively they're using. So that's something that we recognize and we're continually working on. We would love to hear from you, Brian, or your clients that use our tools, because we do, we recognize that we build these tools and then there's always more that can be done, or if there are issues, we want to know what they are. So we're working internally always to improve them, and we have plans, for example, with the CHAMP tool about how we can better integrate certain equity components, other components, that type of thing. But please go ahead and ask them to let me know if they're willing to share, and we are not offended about anything. So I'll put my email in the chat now.
Thanks. No, it's really great. I mean, the tools are so useful. It's just like these small tweaks, to make sure they address all the needs, which I know is hard.
Yeah, well, and we would love to hear that because we want to adjust our tools to do that. Thanks, Brian.
That's great. Daniel Plavi's got a follow-up question. Can you talk more about other communities besides Chelsea and East Boston that you may be involved in the Metro Boston and coastal communities in Massachusetts area? And she really wants you to kind of cover what Lena explained for Marisa.
Okay, so in the Boston area, those are two of the communities that we've most heavily engaged with. We only have the resources to kind of engage in kind of specific applications and limited capacity, but those two groups are in Boston. In the Metro New York area, through City of New York, we've worked with a community group in the South Bronx. The Point is their name. We've also worked with We Act for Environmental Justice in Upper Manhattan, and a community group, Sunset Park in Brooklyn. Also some community groups in the Rockaways. We've done some community-based workshops on Long Island in New Jersey. There's information on those on our website. I believe you could find kind of a summary of the outcomes from that. We've also worked on Long Island with the Shinnecock Native American, their tribe. We've worked with them as we've kind of expanded out into that area. In New Jersey and into Philadelphia. In New Jersey, we've worked quite extensively with the Camden in Camden, New Jersey. Their municipal organization. It's a water utility. I'm forgetting the specific acronym, but we've worked there. And in Philadelphia, we have worked with Eastwick and some other neighborhood groups as well.
Well, great for that set of great questions and answers. I've shared my screen again. Do you guys want to cover these slides quickly before introducing your speaker?
I think we're gonna go to the speaker now, and then after the break around 2 o'clock, Lena, you'll pick back up with these before.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So we're gonna now introduce our speakers. Each of our teams has identified a case study to come and speak with the rest of the group and highlight some of the work that these partners have had in terms of working with each of our CAP RISA teams. I'm pleased to welcome Charles Viehmeister from Con Ed, we have worked at Columbia with for a number of years now on their climate change vulnerability study. I'll just run through a brief bio. Charles is the project manager in the climate and risk and resilience group of Con Ed. He's been involved in addressing climate change impacts on the company's electric, gas, and steam systems since about 2016. Charles has been in the energy field throughout his career and has built on experiences in power plant engineering, construction, and operation, energy efficiency services, project and cost management, business development, marketing, and strategic planning. Charles has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from NYU. So thanks, Charles, for joining us today. I look forward to your presentation highlighting Con Ed's work, which has been really a leader in addressing climate risk and vulnerability in the energy and utility sector.
Yeah, thanks for that intro. Good afternoon, everybody. And Dan, I'll even quote somebody else called us a gold standard. So it was all because of the work that we did with Columbia University. So I just want to go through the right spot here. I'm going to go through, our pathway essentially as we got from 2017 actually up to here, and the key events that have happened and decisions that we've had to make over that course of time. And in each of these, Columbia University was a participant and very helpful in doing that. So the pathway itself all started with Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Sandy, if you want to call it that. Opened up everybody's eyes to the potential of we originally had planned to a 100-year storm. We anticipated flood levels that were about 13 feet or so at the battery. Sandy came in at 14 feet. And that had a big impact on our system and our customers. Following that, we had the opportunity to work with putting together storm hardening programs to try and make sure that we avoid this in the future. And with that, there was a collaborative that was a combination of external parties and the company working together to try and determine what would be the best investments to make following Sandy. And then that collaborative really decided and recognized that climate change was happening, and here was a perfect example of it, and that we shouldn't just, as we have in the past, we've always had an event and we build back stronger from that event. But we all understood that the newer events are going to be different. They're going to be more intense. They may be more frequent. So we put together a plan to do a study, a climate study. Luckily at the time, Columbia University was also working on the New York City panel on climate change. They were doing their own work on how the city would react and anticipate climate change. So we joined up with Columbia so that there would be some commonality between the data that was being used in anticipation, because nobody wanted to be behind or ahead of the other, because I could build up to extreme levels, but if my customers aren't there, and New York City is one of our largest customers, my customer's not there, I've wasted money because they're not ready for me. So we want to make sure that we were timed properly. So that study was really a great opportunity for the company and Columbia to learn what do you have to do to communicate climate change to an engineering-based organization. Because when I first came in, things were very likely, highly likely. Those were not things that I could turn to the engineers and say, okay, design to something that's highly likely. They needed numbers. And that was an education over those 3 years that we did that study between Columbia and ourselves as to what is necessary in terms of the data that needs to be exchanged and determining whether it's quantified data or qualified data. So at least you have data, but you do know that some of it is fuzzy, some of it is not. So that was very helpful through that process. And as a result of going through that process, we came up with an implementation plan of knowing what we could anticipate. Obviously, they're just projections; they're not forecasts or estimates. We had projections going forward that we could work to it and make sure that we had our system anticipating the next new normal and also what the next intense events may be. So we worked through that in 2021. We have actually a structure in place in the company now that focuses on climate. I'm part of that. I'm a project manager in the Climate Risk and Resilience Group. We're shortly going to be up to a staff of 5 individuals in the organization that focus just on this. And then in 2022, actually, legislation was passed for New York State requiring all the New York State electric utilities to do a climate vulnerability study like we did in 2019 and submit a 5, 10, and 20-year resilience plan for climate. So that required Orange and Rockland, it required National Grid, it required NYSEG, all of the electric utilities in the state to do a climate study. This would be our update, and everybody was using data that was provided through Dan, through NYSERDA, and Columbia University. This way, everybody was working off the same database. It was this new CMIP6 models for us, and I think there was a lot of education early on, Dan, with getting those other utilities up to speed with where we were and understanding what you can get out of climate science and what you can't. So this is the stuff I first looked at, right? So for me, we had all these different pathways to find how do you pick a pathway, because obviously there's a lot of different results based on those pathways that you choose. And I'm showing on the red, this is sea level rise projections. And post Sandy, we had put into place a decision, and it was a decision because there was debate about how much sea level rise to anticipate in our rebuilding of and protecting of assets. And there was a discussion as whether it should be 1 foot of sea level rise or 3 feet of sea level rise. And with that, the city also had asked anybody that's doing that to also include about 2 feet of freeboard for a safety factor in their process. We had chosen, because the cost estimates between the two were so significant, and the climate science wasn't strong enough at that time for us to make a choice of going higher. We stuck with the 1 foot. And this is the study that was done after Sandy. So this was done in 2017 through 2019, sorry. And as you can see, our choice of 1 foot turned out to give us some room based on the projections, until we had to make changes. So we had to pick a pathway. We picked the RCP 8.5 50th percentile as the pathway we would work with. And that gave us until about 2040 to then relook at, well, not then, but by 2040, have relooked at and either redesigned, rebuilt, or renovated our protections for sea level rise. So our engineers had that in mind. We gave that data to them so that now they had some sort of an expectation, knowing that sea level rise had happened on its way. So high tides will be different over time. So they have to factor that into their designs. Same thing for temperature, which was the more confident data that was given to us from Columbia. Had different pathways. We were looking what the city was looking at, and the city was using a combination of the 8.5 and the 4.5 to come up with their pathway. And because we had Columbia do a little bit more detail in the projections that they provided us by decade versus the city had 2050, 2080. So they had 2020, 2050, 2080. We had decades out to 2080. We decided to use the data that we got from Columbia. But we picked the 8.5 75th percentile because that aligned with them. So that's what we did back in 2019. And as I said, this legislation now required us this year. And actually, the September of this year, we put out our newest climate study with new data from Columbia University. And in next week, actually, we will be submitting to the state our 20-year resilience plan with detailed information about the first 5 years for their approval. So this is stuff that's going to be done outside the rate case. So the data that we're using this time around, most of it's based on NYSERDA and the Columbia data, but we supplemented that in those areas that are still a little soft in the modeling. We supplemented that with Cornell University's IDF curves, and then National Grid had a data model run by National Grid, by MIT, and they were willing to share it with us. We took that on and took a look at what we could pull from it that would be helpful. Excuse me. And that was the basis of this newest plan. So, as I said, we had picked our pathways in 2019 in line with the city at that time. But now that we had the CMIP 6 data, we really had to take a moment to say, do we stick with that? That was a risk tolerance essentially we had picked at that point in time. Or do we modify it because the climate science now had not just 8.5, but it had 7. So we had a number of different variables out there that we had to look at. But our choice was that this was the level of tolerance we had chosen. And we were going to keep to that until something told us strongly that we should go into place different. And another reason that we kept with this is the 8.5. We view that we have to be a very reliable system, and it's not just being able to be able to operate under new normal conditions, which are going to go out, but also for the extreme events that are going to happen, even the subtle differences year over year in temperatures, heat waves, that we had to make sure that we were able to still provide service in those fluctuations over time. So we felt that the 8.5 was more reflective of that upper bound of the variations, so that we would have some protections in place going forward. So a new normal would be slightly above just your 50th percentile. So this is some of the data that came out. And this is just these are similar to tables that we provided to our engineers. We have a climate change planning and design guideline that we've provided to the organization. It goes for electric, gas, and our steam systems. And it's a reference document that gives them these projections over time with climate variables that are important to them. So just a good example here is maximum temperature, right? So days where the maximum temperature goes over 95 degrees, we're showing the engineers anticipate if you've got an asset that's going to live out to 2030 or even to 2050, say a building, you need to make sure that it's built to withstand those conditions in 2050. So 32 days, which is about a third of the summer with temperatures over 95. You need to anticipate that. If you've got workers out there, you've got to anticipate that. If you've got a HVAC system serving a building, if it's not designed to that today, it needs to be modified by the time you get out to 2050 to handle it. And I'll tell you one thing that was very interesting going from the CMIP 5 to CMIP 6, maintaining our risk tolerance. The 17 days in 2030 was originally projected to occur in 2050. So just in 4 years, the climate data that we were provided moved forward heat about almost a decade. So that was good that we did that, because now we have anticipating higher heat or heat waves. We need to be anticipating that in our designs and standards. Luckily, sea level rise, sea level rise, the projections for that really haven't changed much. So we're still working with, we had a 1 foot of sea level rise. We anticipate by 2040, we now will jump to a 3 feet sea level rise. So any assets that will live past that point, we need to be prepared to make sure that they have that higher standard of protection, whether it's extending a wall, rebuilding a wall, raising equipment, whatever the engineers have to do in order to meet that requirement. So that's the engineering side of it. So, we selected a pathway. That's what we're using, giving it to the engineers. They're looking through their specs, and we've made sure that any of their specs that had references to ambient temperature that now refer to our guideline, so that they anticipate not just a fixed number, but whatever the projected numbers may be going forward. We're the Climate Risk and Resilience Group. We're monitoring the climate conditions. We keep in touch with Dan and others to make sure that we're staying aware of where climate changes are going. Any significant changes, we want to make sure that if it has an impact on us, that we take it into account. We are obligated under this legislation that we're submitting this resilience plan in November every 5 years, which we had previously planned on every 5 years to revisit the resilience plan. But if there's something happens in between that, we're not going to ignore it because it's some legislation. So this is how we take that information and turn it into a resilience plan, right? So the big thing is first you want to see if you can't prevent any damage from the impacts you're expecting, especially on extreme events like hurricanes, nor'easters, heavy wind events, heavy rain and ice storms. So first see if you can feasibly or practically prevent damage. That's always the best because then you don't have outages, and that helps everybody. It cuts down on restoration costs, it cuts down on customers' impacts, is all the best. But if you can't, then work through how can you mitigate the impact of a storm? And we have methods that we put in place to like create breakaway systems that make it easier to reconnect after a storm, so that you're not tearing apart equipment and then having to completely replace it. You just have to do a quick reset and then respond, making sure that we have the best information possible as to what to expect, where to expect the biggest impacts, and be able to focus on repairs timely and quickly so that we can bring our customers back as quickly as possible. How we adapt, and our focus has been mostly on adaptation. We are a delivery service, so most of it is just, we don't worry about supplies, so the mitigation side of it is not as strong, but we do have some aspects of that in the organization. But things like, heat has an effect on our equipment. It degrades it. If it's in a hot environment for too long, it starts to degrade its capacity. You have to derate its throughput, which has an impact if you're looking at electric vehicles, electrification, where your load is going up, but your equipment, because the heat is going lower in capacity, we have to deal with that. These are the things that the engineers need, and it helps for them to have direct numbers to work with. Temperature variable. I like to bring this one because this was a headache I gave to Dan. Our company uses an anticipating load. We use a factor that takes dry bulb and wet bulb, the highest 3-hour average in a day over 3 days. And we take 70% of the day that we're concerned about, 20% of the day before, and 10% of the day before that. That becomes a temperature variable. It sort of gives you a sense of the momentum of a heat wave. And we set that factor as a reference point to saying, you will have peak load on the system at that day. These are also going to be the conditions that your equipment is going to be operating in. You need to be able to anticipate, do you have the right amount of equipment in place? When we design a system, do we want to make sure that we have spare capacity there based on these new numbers going forward? So that's a very specific item that we've worked with. And then the flooding, sea level rise, the flood walls, elevating assets, doing defense in depth in some cases where you want to make sure your wall stands up, but if somehow you get water over it, there might be critical equipment. Build secondary walls behind that, or pumps to try and make sure the water doesn't rise. So the engineers can do all this given proper numbers, and I have to commend Columbia and Dan and Radley Horton as well for their support all the way through from 2017 to today on going through this. If you want more details on our plan, where we go and what we've done, we've already put up our latest climate vulnerability study on our website here, and we will be posting up our climate change resilience plan that goes out 20 years to show you the data that we're working with from Columbia, and then how we're going to be implementing that in terms of different ways of either preventing, mitigating, or responding to those events going forward, and how the system would be able to maintain it. One thing I will bring up, because I did notice this conversation in prior stuff, is the law requires that there's some consideration of equity. And obviously there's a lot of discussion in that area, but not just in this resilience plan, but we are paying attention to that. Our last rate case, we were talking about how would we do that. A difficulty for us is that a lot of our system is networked. And so that if you want to try and spend money to keep that network alive for everybody in it, you have to assume that if you spent $100 on a network, that if 40% of that network was disadvantaged communities, you essentially spent $40 on that community. It's hard to pinpoint investments in that sort of circumstance. When you get out into our overhead systems and that, it's a little bit different. But that is part of this resilience plan that you'll see going forward. I
Charles,
think
I hate to interrupt, but
yeah, I'm
you
about to say
conclude in about another minute.
I'm done. If you have any questions at this point.
We're just a little behind schedule. I think there's one question in here, but just for the sake of time, maybe you could look at the chat and quickly answer that. But we do need to be moving to break right now. It's a little after 2 o'clock. If people could be back here in 5 minutes at about 2:07, we will start the second half of the program. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. I found it really interesting how you guys are making decisions off of it.
Thank you.
So meet you guys back here in about 5 minutes.
All right.
Well, it looks like people are starting to come back from the break. Lena, are you going to talk about these tools next, or are you going to have your guest speaker next?
Yeah, I'll briefly introduce our tool and then have our partner. I'll hand it over to our partner, Christian Baja. So I think should I go ahead and start? As people are joining. Okay.
Please proceed. Yep.
Great. Okay. So I wanted to just highlight a suite of tools that Marisa has created and co-produced with partners. I won't get into the community climate outlooks and seasonal climate summaries today, but I put our website in the chat during the break, and please take a look at our tools, including the climate and hazard mitigation planning tool, which I'm going to give a brief overview before handing it off to Baja. If you could go to the next slide, Jim. Great. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to highlight this was very much a collaboration and a co-produced tool. USDN, where Christian Baja works, was our key partner, as well as a few other CAP-RISA teams and the Northeast Regional Climate Center. Next slide, please. And the purpose of this tool is really to support hazard mitigation plans required by FEMA, but also climate-related local and other climate planning plans just in general, and really provide easily accessible, regularly updated data that hazard mitigation planners and others can actually pull out and use quite easily. It is linked to data sets that are regularly updated. A goal with this tool was that it wouldn't become obsolete, and folks who use it or visit our page can be very confident that they're getting data that is up to date and accurate, and that was just an important kind of goal for this tool, and we have been able to accomplish that. The tool itself holds and contains in a visual map a broad range of climate and hazards variables. If you actually go to the next slide, I think it's easier for me to explain with a quick visualization. So when you go to the CHAMP homepage, this is what it looks like. Right now, we cover these states that are highlighted in varying shades of green, but we do hope at some point to be able to expand this nationwide. And essentially, when you join, you can see on this top panel here that there are themes, there are hazards, and there's a time range. So you can select a specific theme. So in this case, it's extreme rainfall and flooding, and that will give you options of different hazards that might be associated with that particular theme. So an example of that is days with precipitation over 2 inches. For extreme temperatures, there are hazards including days above 90 degrees, days above 95 degrees, that type of thing. And then you can also change the dates that you're looking at over time, because this tool has both historical and then also if you go down to the state level by clicking on a state itself, it has projected data based on a lower emissions climate scenario and a higher emissions climate scenario. So go ahead and play around with this tool maybe after this presentation, but if you do, you'll see that if you click on a state, it gives you the option to actually then start clicking on individual counties. And that's where I think this tool has a lot of utility for, even county level climate managers, which is really important, and hazard mitigation planners, that there is data specific at such a county level, state level, regional level scale. And we also included narratives for that are actually adapted to each location. It's a little hard to explain here just because I can't click through it myself, but we really wanted to have both kind of qualitative as well as quantitative data represented in this tool. And that's something that we are kind of continually trying to build out and improve as well. We were really excited for this tool to be published, but we're also, always trying to improve it, and we'll continue to be working on it. So to that end, I want to, actually, I think I have our data sets on the next slide. If you want to just move to that slide, I always like to show this. So like I said, this is linked to continually updated data. And we're also looking at CMIP6 and, again, kind of as data comes out, we need to figure out how to incorporate it into the tool as well. So with that, I think I will introduce Baja, who is our partner speaker. Thank you. And we're really excited that Baja is here with us today. I asked that her professional bio be pasted into the chat because it is incredible, and I would inevitably miss something that should be highlighted. So please take a look at that. But before handing it over to you, Baja, I just wanted to highlight that Baja really is first and foremost the reason that the CHAMP tool exists. So our partnership with USDN predates my time on the team. But really, we've been working with Baja on this tool for over 5 years, and it's really a small part of her work that's really looking at how to transform hazard mitigation plans and other climate plans into forward-looking tools that incorporate climate, incorporate equity, and really have this really important utility for the future. So we are very happy to be part of Baja's vision. It's been an excellent partnership for us, and we're really excited that you all get to hear from her today. So Baja, I will hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Lena. And nice to see you all today. I don't know if you still want my bio page up, but you're welcome to take the slide down so we can interact. That would be fun. But essentially, everything that was stated is true. We kind of came into this work together, and I was looking back at all my my notes, and it was actually in 2016 and 2017 when I first started having conversations with Neil Burke, who was actually the lead at the time, and just discussing what were the priorities for local governments, what did folks need, and we were talking about the wide range of toolkits that existed at the time, and how they tended to duplicate but not really meet the need that we had or the gap that we have. And so we were looking at some of these planning processes and noting that for us and state governments and other folks that it was a real opportunity with hazard mitigation plans because they are mandated at local, state, and tribal level. And I had been working on one with the city of Baltimore that we transitioned to the disaster preparedness plan back in 2013. And it was seen as sort of a lead plan at that time because it did incorporate climate change, which was not something that was brought into a hazard mitigation plan typically. And so we started breaking down the process and explaining and working with Marisa around sort of these plans being archaic and a huge opportunity for improvement. And so USDN started working on a pilot sort of hazard mitigation transformation at the same time of being in partnership with the RISA on this tool. And we spent a lot of time doing fun whiteboard sessions. I got to hang out with Deborah and Crystal a lot in these fun rooms. And essentially, the key point for us was the integration of social justice, ecological components, and climate change into the all hazard mitigation plans. And for them, it was to develop a tool that worked alongside and really helped us out there. And so what we've done kind of alongside of, and been really grateful to Lena and others for being able to review many, many times, is this document that we kind of call the Choose Your Own Adventure platform that allows our members, as well as anyone else, to go through and select whether they want to incorporate social, ecological, or climate considerations into their plans. And we're hoping they click all three. And then the level of depth that they want to take. If they want to be very broad and sort of identifying this is something that's important, but we don't have enough political support right now, or if they want to go into depth and be real and have the real conversations and talk about things like reparations and land back and the real need for proactive climate action. So that platform exists, and we've been really grateful then also to have the data to go along with it. And we spent a lot of time with this team identifying how would this platform look best, how would it function best, and Lena really highlighted some of the key things that were there for us that had to be, which is we were looking to save money for our members so that they didn't have to go back and have a consulting firm then create another assessment of data for them. We wanted to have the data readily available so that it was something that was consistently up to date. And so we weren't waiting 5 years to update a hazard mitigation plan, but it could be continuously so that our members weren't working with outdated information. And that it was also really easy to plug into the different sections of the hazard mitigation plan. So we were able to identify where the best sort of data elements fell. And since they're pretty structured and FEMA makes these specific requirements, it was a little easy for us to do that alignment. And so what's been great for us in this is the team really listened. And I'm not somebody who just sort of asks for one thing and then backs off. They had to deal with me pretty much on like a monthly basis of consistent harassment. But it was fun. We had a really good time. They were really fantastic. And it was great also to bring in the other RESA programs as well, because it helped with alignment. We have members all over North America. So it's fabulous to align with our Mid-Atlantic members first, and then also to bring in our Great Lakes members and our Carolina members. And I think we're hoping to see that expansion across the entire country, because we're working with members in Hawaii that are working on these plans, West Coast, and other areas as well. But it's been really great. I can't say enough, like this has felt like one of those partnerships where we're really being heard, and then our members are actually finding value in using the tool. And also we did a lot of the upfront interviews with our members to say, you know, is this working how you would want to do it, and bringing in their hazard mitigation planners as well. So we spent a good deal of time really creating this collectively, and it's been a really pleasant experience. I'm happy to answer any questions or to give you any more information that might be relevant, but I intentionally don't use slides so I can see all your lovely faces. So there's 3 of you that I can see. Nice to see you all.
Yeah, so
Hi, Amy. 4.
other people can turn on their cameras as well too, please.
Hey, Josh. Good to see
So,
you.
Yeah, so let's open up the Q&A. If you've got a question, why don't you drop it in the chat, and we can just handle it that way. As I'm waiting for a question in the chat, Baja, Lena, this has been just super useful for us here in North Carolina to be able to compare to other communities up further to the north, and especially working with rural groups in some of these counties to be able to show them, you know, the power of asking questions this way. So it's a great tool.
That's great to hear. Just so everyone knows, I did put the link to the tool in the chat, and if you get a chance to play around with it later, please feel free to reach out with any questions or feedback as well, because our ears, you know, we're always open to improving it. And thanks so much, Baja, for being here and coming on and speaking. Like I said, Baja's partnership with MRISA predates my time on MRISA, and when I showed up, it was like, oh, Baja, we get to meet with Baja tomorrow, you know? So like we said, it's been really great. Awesome. Andrea, glad you got the chance to learn about this tool.
let's not be shy. We have some excellent people here to answer some key questions for us.
I will say, if you're looking for an example of a community that's used this plan, but unfortunately wasn't able to use the data set because they didn't fall within the area, Boulder County is a multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan that incorporates a lot of small towns in the mountains, as well as some of the bigger towns like Boulder City. And their recent multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan utilized the new platform, and they actually decided to go kind of all in. So they have elements related to Indigenous rights and wisdom, racial equity and development, and then really calling in climate change. And then they were really bummed we didn't have this available for them as a data set. So we looked as an example of something for them to improve upon in the future.
Okay, so there's a request to show the slide again. So I'm going to share my screen and see if I can go back. I think that's the slide that was being requested. Lena, maybe you could just take these two links and put them in chat then as well too, in case some people might be having
Yeah.
some saying this.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I have the link to the tool, and then yeah, I will say we did actually create a report as well that kind of helps with the use of the tool. So I'll put the link to that report as well. And that also has a list of the data sets and that type of thing, Andrea, if you want it at a later point. So I'll find
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Wonderful.
Y'all are so shy. You don't want to ask any other fun questions?
Come on,
I could-
you're leaving us hanging here.
In here with a question. Will the tool be updated with the 5th National Climate Assessment data?
Yeah, so essentially whenever anything changes, we come together and look at it and decide where, what's the utility and what needs to be shifted. So we actually just talked about that this week. So we will, like I said, the goal is for this tool to be as up to date as possible so that folks aren't getting data that is no longer viable or no longer as, correct or specific as new data that has come out. We try to do updates as much as possible kind of grouped together just for kind of facilitation and ease of actually making those changes. But we are in conversation about that now. And I'm going to put the report link in right now. And I see there's another hand.
Yeah, there's first a question that was put into chat from Akara, and then we'll get to you, Ariane. The question is, how hard or easy was it to convince USDN members to incorporate climate hazards? Is there still much resistance, and how best did you convince anyone who was not easily convinced?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I would say is it's not been hard to convince USDN members because most USDN members are in USDN to work on racial equity, sustainability, and climate change at that intersection. And so they may sometimes work for very conservative places, and we work with them to be strategic about framing and language. Like Boulder County was particularly conservative compared to Boulder City. And so we were able to do more in the Boulder City component of that plan than we were able to do in the full Boulder County plan. But it was something where I actually went out there, met with their emergency manager, did a half-day training with him about the benefits, and then actually were able to kind of say, here's the reason this is going to be beneficial to you over time. This is how it's going to connect to funding platforms, et cetera. So not so much resistance, but it was that convincing was often going out and having conversations with the emergency managers, because a lot of our members are the sustainability or climate folks. They're not necessarily the emergency managers, and it's really important to bring them along.
Great. Ariane, we'll go to you. You can ask your question.
Yes, thank you. We have a pretty diverse group as part of this, and some are already providing some climate services, and others are developing their, how they're going to be providing services. So I'm just curious, given that you work with so many agencies and municipalities, what do you think the role or opportunity might be for consultants or private sector folks to support the need and the resources and tools, like if we're developing our services, should we focus on the facilitation of and guidance of how to use these tools and apply them? Or is there a niche piece that's missing that we should be looking at developing?
I have lots of opinions about this. Lena might have a different idea, but what we hear from our members and in particular is that they're saturated with tools and resources and new things coming their way. And so what would be great for consultants coming into this place is to acknowledge these things exist. They exist to be used. And if there's I think it's the facilitation and how to utilize them and the facilitation of actually putting it together so that there's alignment. There's alignment with the USDN tool and the CHAMP tool, even though they're identified, it's still people sometimes need that stepping and that support and then the language to reflect the specificity of where they're at. And then I think in using it, if something pops up where you're like, oh, there's a gap here where we need something else, it would be collaborating with this team to make sure we're all on the same page so that can go out to a bunch of other people.
Josh has a question. Seems we're in a new implementation phase of letting Thousand Flowers bloom and learning how to apply past adaptation planning and including new kinds of planning and tools, mainly because funding now is available. How do we compile new lessons learned, best practices, and codes that will start bringing national and state policy discipline to thousands of local actions? Boy, such a simple question, Josh. I'm sure Baja has a great answer for that one. Or Lena.
Yeah, I think, Josh, you and I have maybe had this conversation for 10 years. What I would say is there is no one answer, but that it's going to be a collaboration, I think, amongst different organizations, especially member organizations like ASAP, like USDN and others, along with our academic partners and our other teams to be able to come together around some key things instead of having everything and the kitchen sink, because then we try to do like 2 million things. How can we say these are the biggest priorities? These are the things we want to make sure everybody understands and is aligned on, especially since we have funding and momentum right now in this moment, and there's an opportunity to optimize. If we try to do everything, I think we're going to lose the opportunities that we have, because then we're just going to be going in circles. So that would be my opinion. And I know folks at ASAP, we talked about it a while ago. We were asked to give some feedback into another process at the federal level. And instead of them doing it, us doing it, Jackie doing it, like all these other folks, we said, how about we all come together? We say, these are our top 10 things, and then we have it signed by like all these organizations. That sort of approach, I think, is going to be more helpful for us over time.
That's certainly a discussion that we've been having in the private sector member-led interest group for ASAP. So it is one of those things we're trying to figure out how to mobilize the right stakeholders. The one thing that I want to just also interject for Ariane is, you know, I also work for a small consulting group, and if you haven't reached out to your local CAPRISA or your local sustainability director, do so almost immediately. They are very good at helping answer your questions about where the needs are and where your services would be most valued. It's just been invaluable for us to communicate to both of those groups. So I'm glad that both those voices are here today, because I can tell you from the private sector, that was certainly a fast path to success for our company.
That's great to hear. And I know, Baja, I know you had, I think, a hard stop. I don't want to keep you, but thank you so much for coming. This was great to have you here.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me. And apologies that I do a hard stop, but have a good rest of your meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Baja. Bye.
We are right on time and just excellent set of programs here today. We're going to be going into a breakout activity, and we're going to be going into 4 rooms, and we're going to be using a Jamboard again to be really reflecting on 3 key questions. I won't read these. I'll try to paraphrase them a little bit. First of all, the presentations, are they resonating with the type of work that you do? And if so, are there some examples that were presented that are really relevant? This is going to give the CAPREISs some great feedback. Secondly, the CC Run case study example talked about a partnership, these public-private partnership. And that's a little bit different than these partnerships with local governments. So kind of what are your thoughts on that, and how does that maybe fit into your business model? And the third part is then, after learning about Maurice's CHAMP tool, could you see this tool being useful, applicable in your work? And just a little bit of a discussion, yes, why or why not? So with that, I will let Mia or whoever is going to be sending us to the breakout room go there. We've got 20 minutes, so we will see you back in the main room at 2:50. Well, I don't know about the well, I don't know if everybody's back yet or if everybody stayed. Mia, is everybody back?
Yeah, everyone should be back now, Jim.
Okay, great. So I don't know about you guys, but this was just another fantastic day for me. The case studies, the discussion, getting to know some of you just through the conversations as well too. So really just kind of want to wrap up and just remind you that you can sign up for some one-on-one consultations. You can use the Slack channel to communicate too. And also kind of, give a preview of coming attractions. We are going to have the November 28th closing session, which I've, seen a lot of the content that's going into that. That should be a really good session as well too. Is there any questions or comments that people want to make before we wrap up for the day? Anything else that you really want to ask our presenters today?
I'd love to also open the space for any reflections from the breakout activity. I know that our group, Josh and Carlo and I, had a really great conversation, not to call you all out, but it'd be nice to hear from some of the other groups as well.
We had a good discussion. Just a couple quick points that came up were the abundance of climate information that exists and how to navigate the way through that, and what role, kind of the CAPREISs are there to kind of participate and guide through that process. That's one point that came up. And then I'll just share one more thing. Lena and I, and kind of where our teams sit in the CAPREIS space, are probably 2 of the teams that are more oriented towards climate and climate projections, whereas some of the other teams are more oriented towards weather information and seasonal forecasting. And for those that have attended multiple sessions, I wonder if there was any takeaways or any notice of that. Part of it's our capacity in terms of technical expertise, but it's also a reflection of the regions where we're working in terms of what the demand for information is. So perhaps that's a point for those who've attended multiple sessions can think about as they go forward or take away from today.
I'd also just like to add, this was incredibly valuable for me just to get a chance to hear your questions and chat with a few of you all during the breakout. So thank you so much. And I also wanted to say, so we didn't have availability like in the next week for a consultation or before the final session, but we really are available to chat anytime. I'm going to put my email in the chat again. So feel free to reach out at any point next year, or to plan something. Like we're around past the this academy as well.
Josh, it looks like you chatted a link here. You want to give a little bit of background?
Yeah, one thing I raised in our talk, which I've been promoting for a bit, is something called resilience authorities that we've developed in Maryland at the county level. So there's two main ones right now, Charles County and Anne Arundel County, where the state capital is Annapolis, that gets flooded a lot in their waterfront. But they're what I call kind of resilience credit cards. They're basically delegated authority from the state to use state funds or funding that has come to the county to spend on resilience and preparedness in advance without going back to the state and sort of going, Mother, may I, about spending on those things. They also tend to be directed by citizen priorities, so they have good engagement with the community. So to me, they're really great financial tools that are sort of like mundane, but they're part of the mainstreaming process, in which if we're going to do this stuff at the local level, we also have to build the financial infrastructure to make it easy to do this. Where before, there's all these constraints for accountability and everything that come down from up above. Not that there isn't accountability for how the money's spent at the state level, but it just takes one more step out, and it's a major bureaucratic step, which allows for greater flexibility. So I'd recommend looking into them, and I'd love to propagate them around the country. So.
Great. Who else would like to share? Well, hearing none. Thank you very much to our two speakers today, and they're really the organizers, not only talking about their programs, but also bringing in the wonderful guest speakers too. So Lena, Daniel, thank you very much. And thank all the rest of you for being here and continuing this conversation and building resilience in our nation. So thank you all, and we will see you after Thanksgiving, November 28th, for the closing session. And I hope everybody has a wonderful time off on the holiday.